we would have went broke very quickly and probably ended up in thousands of dollars of credit card debt.
I literally have to go work 2 jobs to make enough money to make ends meet.
So I literally thought you could go to jail for something like that.
When people say it's a waste, I'm like, then go live outside.
It's not if, it's when. There are going to be things that pop up in your life, whether it's an unexpected something or an actual emergency. Welcome to Just Another Money podcast with your hosts, Lauren and Nick. We're here to take real-world money situations and break them down into actionable steps you can actually use.
Whether you're budgeting, paying off debt, or saving for your future, we're all about making finances easy to understand and putting you in control of your money. Hey everyone, and welcome back to today's episode where we are talking about financial myths. We're going to be breaking down 6 of the most common misconceptions around money that could be holding back your finances. But before we get into that, Lauren, I wanted to share this statistic with you and get your take on it. So, according to a recent study by LendingTree, 96% of Americans believe at least one money myth. For example, 45% believe that carrying a credit card balance helps your credit score, and over 25% of Americans 40 and younger don't think they need to be saving for retirement. So, question for you is, before you got started in your finances and before you started taking it really seriously, what money myths did you have and how did you kind of get past them?
Yeah, so something that I was but that I heard a lot growing up was that you're always going to have debt. Specifically, I heard student loans and car payments. So I came from a lower income family. So that is something that we did have a car payment. I remember my mom and dad having car payments growing up. And then when my sister went to college, she of course had student loans. So that was also something that I learned. My sister's 8 years older than me. So she went to college way before I did. So she had a car payment, student loans. And I remember, you're always going to have these things. So don't worry about it. This is just a part of your life and you're going to manage these loans and, the car payments that you have. You're just going to manage it and live your life around that. Now, this changed for me once I started my debt-free journey because I was living in that world of you're going to have your student loans forever and you're also going to have a car payment because you have to drive something, right? So whenever I started my debt-free journey, that's when I really got serious about my finances and was oh my gosh, I mapped out a debt-free plan. And I was I can accomplish this in 3 years and then have no debt. And that was so outside of my reality of existence because like I said, I grew up in a lower income family, so that was something that I had a myth about. And I think this is still a lot of people's myth because, student loans are still circulating out there and car payments only seem to be getting more expensive. So that was the myth that I had and really how it changed for me, which is kind of crazy that my whole world growing up radically changed back in 2017 when I started this whole journey.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely the American way of life is having debt. And it's just been so normalized. But I would say one of the biggest, financial myths that I had for myself was before I got into personal finance and all that was just thinking that it had to be more complicated than it was. And I think a lot of that comes from, we're not really taught about finances or how to build a budget or things like that in school. And it really wasn't talked about at home. But I remember, and I had mentioned this in the first episode, but I remember once I kind of got settled into my career, I got to this point where I just was really frustrated with not feeling confident with my money. And it really started to bother me. And so I spent, the next 1 or 2 years really diving into that world. But there's this saying by Dave Ramsey, around personal finance. And he says that personal finances is only 20% head knowledge and 80% behavior. And honestly, once I finally took the time to do my research and figure out what I needed to do to feel confident with my finances, I really found that to be true. And I think it's honestly just as complicated as you make it. The stuff you need to know to be good with your finances is really just basic math, addition, subtraction, sometimes some multiplication and division, but it's as complicated as you make it. And I think the simpler you can be with it, the better. But I do think that the behavior side of it, that's the biggest component to it. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle. But really excited to get into today's episode. So do you want to talk us through this first myth?
Yeah. So this first myth is one that I think so many of us have heard so many times. But this one says credit cards are for emergencies. So according to a Bankrate survey, 1 in 4 Americans have zero emergency savings. About 59% of Americans are uncomfortable with their amount of savings, and then only 44 of US adults could pay an emergency expense of $1,000 or more from their savings. This means a lot of people are putting emergencies or unexpected expenses on credit cards. So, Nick, I'm curious, why do you think people are generally okay with putting emergencies on their credit card?
Yeah, I feel like it's exactly what you said at the beginning. Like, debt is just like a way of life for a lot of Americans. And I feel like it's so normalized to that you're going to have your student loans, like you're going to have your credit card debt or your car loan. And so, hey, this emergency came up, like I'm just going to put it on the credit card. Now, I to be fair, like I do think there's a good amount of people who fall into like this trap of like putting an emergency on a credit card because they like legitimately didn't have an emergency fund. Like maybe they haven't had the opportunity to save up some money, whether it's because they aren't handling their money right or their expenses are too high or whatever it is. And then I also think there's a good portion of people who actually think like, hey, it's probably just a good idea. I just have that credit card. It's only for emergencies. Like I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, not just like online, but even just coaching people where it's like, yeah, this is like my credit card only for emergencies. And I'm like, oh, it just hurts to hear that, you know?
Yeah. And I think people can use their credit card for emergencies. Like if I had an emergency, I would use my credit card, but then I would take the money from like my high yield savings account to pay for it.
Exactly.
So there's a difference there. But I also think that, in addition to, people not having the money yet and using that credit card, I also think there's an unrealistic like outlook on emergencies. I often think people are just like, oh, it's not going to happen to me. They have that mentality of like, oh, nothing's going to happen. It's going to be fine. And then, so putting something on a credit card is just not a big deal. Right. And then it's like, oh no, I'm in deeply spiraling into credit card debt after you do have to put an emergency on there. And then you have to continue to live your life. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Yeah. And like, I feel like a lot of people, they also don't want to save up an emergency fund because they see that as money just sitting on the sidelines and not doing anything for them. And like, look, I get it. Like if you have to save up 10, 15, $20,000 to put on the sidelines, like it kind of sucks that you can't put that money into the market because you want that to be easily accessible. And so I get that sentiment, but at the same time, like it's supposed to be like that shield between your everyday life, your finances, and then all the random shit that could happen throughout the month, right? Like it's like kind of like that safety blanket that you wrap around yourself that says, hey, if anything goes wrong, like it's no longer an emergency. It's just an inconvenience. And then you don't have to rely on the credit cards. But I do like what you said. And like, that's something that I would do is like, if I had an emergency, I would use my credit card, but I'd do it strategically. And that means I have the money ready to pay that off. And like you said, just pull that money from my high yield savings account, pay off the credit card. Cause I probably don't want to miss out on like those airline miles. Cause I have the rapid rewards. Like I get airline miles when I use my credit card, but like, that's very different than saying, oh, I have an emergency. And so I'm just going to put it on this card and then I'll deal with it later. And I think that's the trap that a lot of people fall into, you know?
Yeah. And I also feel like, people understand that credit cards, maybe they don't understand that credit cards have very high interest, but if you have an emergency that, maybe even a couple $100s or a couple $1,000 and the 23% interest that's on that is going to spiral so fast, like the opposite direction you want it to, you know what I mean? So I think that doesn't come into play sometimes. Like, oh, I'm just going to put it on a credit card, but they do not take into account that you're literally going to be paying that for a very long time because it's going to continue to, go upwards in the amount that it is. So, it's so important to build an emergency fund. Yeah, it sucks to just have this money sitting in an account, but this is the exact reason because we're going to have emergencies that happen. It's not, I've said this 1,000 times. It's not when it's not if, it's when. Mm-hmm. Like there are going to be things that pop up in your life, whether it's an unexpected something or an actual like emergency, but we need to be putting something aside for that to save for the rainy day because it's going to rain.
Yeah. And for anyone out there who does have credit card debt, look at your most recent statement. It'll tell you like if you make just the minimum payments on it, how many years it's going to take you to pay it off. And like some of these can be absurd. It's like, oh, you're not paying this off until like 2035 or something if you just make the minimums. And then they'll also give you a breakdown if you can make more, it'll shorten it by, X number of years. But like that's the game you're playing if you put an emergency, any debt on a credit card, because then you're paying this off for so many years. And like you said, 23% interest, like I don't know if people think that's not a lot or a lot, but like that's going to add so much interest to your debt. And like, it's just, you're going to be paying it off for years when really you should be taking the time, and as inconvenient as it might be, save up an emergency fund, even if it's just like $1,000, like something, so that not all of that emergency is going on a credit card. Like you have something to pull from in that case. But I think for me, like the biggest rule of thumb that I always heard is to treat your credit card like a debit card. Like you shouldn't be putting expenses on it unless you have the cash to pay for it. And if you don't have the cash, then that probably means like you can't afford it. And now look, emergencies can be different. That's why we plan ahead, right?
Yeah, that was something my mom taught me growing up. You know, I come from a very low income family, and my mom was mostly there raising me as a single mom for most of my life. And that was one thing she taught me. You know, she didn't make a ton of money, but she knew that we could not put things on the credit card that we could not afford. If we could not afford to pay for it from the bank account, it wasn't going on the credit card.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I've personally never had credit card debt because I actually like thought it was illegal to have credit card debt until like college. Like I literally thought like you could like go to jail for something like that. I don't know why I thought that, but I just was like, oh, you have to have the money to pay for this. So that's where I stand on that. But yeah, so I feel like, you know, people in these situations, like, you know, we've talked about it before, like building up an emergency fund. So at least start with, if you can, a couple $100, $1,000, I don't care, but start setting it aside over time so that you're not getting into credit card debt. And here's another thing I think about. People think, okay, if I have an emergency, I can put this one expense on a credit card. But what they don't account for is another emergency that's going to happen in a few months. And then you have not even paid off the old one. And now your interest is at 25%. And it's continuing to spiral upwards, and you had another new emergency on it. So that's when people get into severe credit card debt, because these things keep happening. So if you don't stop like the bleeding, it's never going to stop. So, but Nick, I have a pop quiz for you, and I did not put the answer here for you. So let's go for it. So which generation has the least amount in savings? Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, or boomers?
Ooh, I feel like I've read a statistic about this, but I have no clue. I feel like based on like logically, I would assume that boomers, they've had the most time to like save up. And so I guess if I'm following that logic, it should be Gen Z. But for some reason, I feel like it's maybe millennials who have like the least amount of savings. I feel like that was kind of the generation to like rebel against like the rules of what society is. And maybe one of those is having an emergency fund. So I'm going to go with millennials.
Yeah, it is actually millennials.
Nice.
And I'm a millennial, so I get it. I do think we are also in that weird generation where like all of us were told to go to college and like take out as much student loans as you can. So like, you know, that's a problem, as well as our aging parents. So now we're trying to afford our lives and start our own families, pay for student loans, and then also help our parents who have not prepared for retirement. So I do think millennials are kind of in a weird situation there. Also, we graduated high school the year of it was 2008. So a lot of us were around that time when the market was down and the job outlook was not good. So we'll give millennials a break there. But yeah, it was surprising to me that Gen Z had more in savings than millennials.
Yeah, that is surprising to me, because I know a lot of people that are like in that younger generation are just, I feel like it's split 50-50, and I feel like there's not too many people in the middle. Like they're either exceptionally responsible, like taking their careers seriously at a young age, like maybe even getting married, starting families, or you're just on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, and you're not even like, you're trying to hold off as long as you can before you have to kind of settle into life. And so I feel like there's maybe that it's because of that split that you do see a higher number, but I don't know. I was surprised that it actually is millennials.
Yeah, and also maybe the Gen Z, they made their money from TikTok, so.
TikTok and Bitcoin and NFTs, you know?
Seriously.
All right, taking a quick break from today's episode, Lauren and I have some exciting news we'd like to share with you. If you're feeling stuck with your finances and don't know where to start, we have you covered with our one-on-one financial coaching.
These are no strings attached coaching sessions that you can sign up for today. No ongoing commitment. You simply book a session whenever you need one.
Each call is 90 minutes, and by the end of it, you'll have a clear budget to work with and a solid plan to start paying off your debt. Plus, we'll make sure you walk away with some awesome tools to keep you on track, including our budget dashboard and expense tracker, as well as our debt payoff optimizer.
And the best part, you'll get to work with both of us on the call. Together, we'll help you develop the best possible strategy forward, answer your questions, and make sure you feel confident about managing your money.
So if you're ready to get a handle on your budget and kickstart your financial journey forward, check out the link in the show notes to book your first session.
We can't wait to get started with you. Now, back to the episode.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. So this myth is definitely something I've heard. And again, I feel like I've heard it a lot from the younger generations, but I'm sure based on that last statistic that it's affecting a lot of the millennials as well. So this one says, I'm young, so I don't need to be saving for retirement yet. And in fact, a recent study found that 61% of those between the ages of 18 and 34 are not saving for retirement. So Lauren, why is there this misconception that you can put off your retirement savings until later in life?
Well, I think whenever you first, come out of college, you think, I don't make enough right now. I'm trying to afford this apartment. I'm trying to afford my car payments. My student loans are coming due. So you're like, I'm just not worried about investing right now. So it's not a priority for you. Right. And then we know life happens as you get older. So then it doesn't ever become the priority. And then you wake up, some of the past situations we've talked about, you wake up at 40 and you're like, oh no, I should have been thinking about this and I haven't been.
Yeah.
I think as you get older, so you come out of college and, you're just trying to afford your life, but then you start to take on more responsibility, whether that's getting engaged and planning a wedding or, having kids or even buying a house, something like that. Increasing your lifestyle because you're starting to make a little bit more money and you want to start doing a few other things rather than paying your car payment and your student loans. Right. So there never really comes a time where you're putting money aside to invest. Right.
Yeah.
I think it's super important for young people to start young because you're never going to notice that money that's missing. But once you create this lifestyle around the income you have, it's so hard to pull back from that. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest issue and why young people don't want to be, but then they end up 40 years old and they have nothing saved. So.
Yeah. And I feel like there's also this, I guess kind of belief, especially among the younger generations, that there's not really a path to get to retirement. Like the way that housing has increased in prices over the last few years, the way that inflation has gone up, the average price of things just keeps going up. And I feel like there's this big belief out there that retirement just isn't something that I'll be able to rely on. Social Security might not be there by the time I get to that retirement age. And I feel like it kind of compounds into this idea that it's going to be a lot harder than it is. And so why should I even try? I should just live today, spend my money now. And that's also something we talked about in the last episode. But yeah, like you said, I don't think I've ever met someone who's consistently been investing in the stock market who was like, I wish I started later. Consistently will meet anyone who's an investor who will say, I wish I started when I was younger. And if you can start when you're 18 or fresh out of college at 21, I think that's going to propel you forward so much quicker because it's really about how many years can you have your money invested. And if you have it invested for a longer period of time, you're going to really start to experience the effects of compound interest, which is going to be your best friend when you're trying to grow your money. But I also think there's this misconception that you have to have a lot of money or you have to have a decent amount of money to even start investing. And look, I'll be honest, the first time I deposited money into an investment account was with $100. That was it. That was the first place I started with. And when I was first kind of settling into learning how to invest, it was literally could I do $100 a month? And to me at the time, that felt like a lot of money. And it still is for some people, but it just built up that habit of doing it over and over and over again. And now I'm at a point where I'm maxing out my Roth IRA and putting money into my brokerage account. Now it's the habit has been built up. And so now the only thing that's changing is how much can I afford to do on a monthly basis?
Yeah. And back to Gen Z. So my niece is freshly out of college and starting life. And I was like, you are opening a Roth IRA and you're going to put it, I think she puts $50 a month into it right now, but I'm like, hey, starting somewhere is the path forward because I said, you're going to thank me someday when you're 60 years old and you have all this money in your Roth IRA. You're going to be like, Aunt Lola was the one who knew it all. Right. But something else, that you mentioned here about how young people don't see a path towards retirement. Mm-hmm. I see crazy comments out there on social media that say, if someone says I'm a millionaire, I have $1 million in my 401k, people have the audacity to say $1 million isn't that much. Yeah. I'm like, it's more than zero. So I feel like we need to take a step back and realize, okay, $1 million might not be a lot in the future, but it's still a heck of a lot better than what you have going on right now. So I hate that mentality. I hate seeing that comment out there.
You see it all the time, especially like when someone's like, if you invest, X amount of dollars per year, you'll hit $1 million by the time retirement. And they're like, yeah, but in 40 years, it's not going to be worth anything. I'm like, well, it's going to be worth a whole lot more than what you're going to have, which is nothing. Yeah. But it's also like, there is some reality to that. Like, yeah, $1 million won't be even close to as much as it is today in 40 years. But even in terms of income, like $100,000 a year now does not go as far as it used to go like 10, 15 years ago. And I think that's just reality. And I think you do have to adjust for it. But I played around with a compound interest calculator to kind of get ready for this, to debunk this myth. And one thing that I did want to point out. So if you started investing $500 a month at the age of 30, so you've had maybe 10 years to really settle into your career, you've built up maybe the ability in your finances and with your income and your expenses to be able to start investing. And let's say you started at age 30 and you invested $500 a month until your age 65 retirement age. You could retire with over $1 million. But I think the crazy part is that if you waited just 5 years, so that means you invested from age 35 to 65, again, that same $500 a month, your money would only grow to about $685,000. That's still a lot of money, but that's a $400,000 difference. Now, I think the part that's really cool is that if you started 5 years earlier, and so I know I said a lot of numbers right now, but let's say you started at the age of 25, you had 40 years in the market, investing $500 a month until you're 65 years old, your money would grow to $1.5 million. And I think that's a really good example that shows that like time is on your side when you're young, but the longer you wait, the less time your money has to grow. And if you could really take advantage of whatever age you're at now and just get started, you're going to be so much more thankful by the time you hit that retirement age. And you're probably also going to wish that you started even sooner. So yeah, long story short, get started investing sooner than later.
Yeah, that's awesome. And if you wait until like way later in life, then you're going to have to be investing like thousands probably per month to catch up on this. So moral of the story, just start early. Okay. Yeah. Let's jump into the next one here. So, oh man, this is a good one. So this one says renting is throwing your money away. Nick, why do you think that's such a hot topic?
I get some of the sentiment, like, you're putting money towards this thing on a monthly basis, towards paying off this mortgage, but you're not really gaining any of the benefits of it, right? Like you're not able to build equity. You're not able to take any tax deductions. And at the end of the day, like you could still get kicked out on literally like a 2 weeks notice. Some places, maybe it's as long as a month's notice, right? But I think the thing that people don't recognize is that rent is the most you're going to pay for housing in a single month. But if you were to own, your mortgage is literally the least amount you're going to pay. Like there are so many other expenses that are associated with home ownership that people don't consider, because especially a few years ago, you would hear people say, oh, well, like it doesn't make sense to own. Like or it doesn't make sense to rent. I could own for cheaper. And they're not considering homeowners insurance, which is significantly more expensive than renters insurance. They're not anticipating the repair costs. Like you're going to have to set aside money every single month, just like an emergency fund for the home specifically. And there's also property taxes, which depending on what state you live in can be pretty high, right? Like I think there's this big misconception that renting is throwing away money, but you are still at the end of the day paying for literally a roof over your head. So I don't think I think there's some truth to it, right? Like it's like your money isn't growing, right? Like you're not putting it towards this asset that's appreciating in value, but you are still paying for something that you use every single day.
Yeah. And I get that. I understand that. I understand renting does not get you like the house at the end of the day. Right. And I think renting doesn't make sense in some situations. Like if you're not financially prepared, definitely no home ownership for you until you get there. Living in a high cost of living city where the houses are so expensive, right? Or you like having that flexibility to just pick up and move when you want. So I think there's so many different, people or individuals, they have to decide what's best for them. But okay, so let's walk through some numbers. My husband and I bought a home a few years back and we spent a lot of money up front. And so I want to share these real numbers with you to help you understand that it is so important for you to have like your finances under control before you make the biggest purchase of your life. So we put down between closing costs and a down payment around $30,000 altogether. So that was what we signed the check. We got the keys. We're like, whoa, we own a house, right? When we moved in, the first thing we did was we got new carpet, $5,000, painted the entire house, about $1,000, and then put a new driveway in because it was completely cracked, another $5K.
Jeez.
That $5K for a driveway was not fun. Neither was the new carpet. Yeah, it was great, but that's a lot of money when you first move in. And then over the course of the few years of living there, we, redid little things here and there, but the master bath and probably like replacing all of like the toilets and stuff in our other bathrooms, that was about $10K when it was all said and done. So all of that money, you think about, that was just like 3 years of us living there. So add that all together. I didn't even add it all together, but that's a lot of money, about over $40,000, close to 50. But that's some of the real numbers when you think about owning a home that a lot of people don't think about. They're like, oh, I have this little down payment. Now I can buy a house and be happy. And it's like, that's not what it's all, cracked up to be. And then, emergencies. We had a pipe burst in our house. There was no landlord to call. So guess who I had to call? An emergency plumber on the holiday weekend. They came out and it was $1,000 that we had to pay to have this pipe repaired. Again, not a fun $1,000. I didn't get anything from it other than a fixed pipe. So, if we had bought a house without being financially stable, and having our emergency fund in place and having this fund to do these different home projects, we would have went broke very quickly and probably ended up in thousands of dollars of credit card debt.
Yeah, I feel like people don't appreciate the benefits that come with renting enough. Like, yeah, there are some downsides, but you mentioned one of them, which is just the flexibility. Like you are literally only tied to whatever lease that you sign, and even then, like there's usually a way that you can break the lease. Sure, you'll lose some money from it, like maybe it's your security deposit or whatever. But there's so much flexibility that you could literally just pick up and move. And it's not that easy when you own a home. Like selling a home is not just like I could just make this decision real quick and then it's done. Like this could be up to like a 6-month process. Like me and my wife have been looking for homes. There's homes that have been sitting on the market for 6 months or longer. And that means whoever that homeowner was is now probably paying either a new rent or a new mortgage, and it still has to pay that old mortgage. And on top of that, right? Like you said, like there's no headache that comes with renting, because if something goes wrong, you call your landlord. Granted, there's some landlords that do suck, but you also have to find the right place that's good, that works for you. And like, there's no additional headache on top of what you're paying for rent. Like that's literally it. Like you are not responsible for paying for anything else. And like the maintenance costs, like you said, can be insane. We've been looking at houses, and like just to even get the monthly payment down to where something we're comfortable with, like the amount that you need as a down payment is crazy, And so I don't think it's as simple as oh well, my rent is equivalent to housing prices or monthly mortgages in the area. Like it's a 1-for-1. Like it's so far from being a 1-for-1 that I don't think people appreciate what renting is, in today's world.
Yeah, definitely. And something you said there, you mentioned about how the houses can sit on the market for a while.
Yeah.
I often hate that people think your house is an investment because, unless you sell it or like leverage against it, you don't have any money from it. You know what I mean? Like you're living in your largest asset that like you can't do anything with unless you want to sell it, but then you have to buy something else. So I don't know. I think we need to help young people and people in general to like make the best decision for them when it comes to buying a house, because it's such a large amount of money just to go into blind. I've heard this before somewhere else, but I wonder why people don't feel the same way. Let's say about going out to eat. Now I know that the difference in money there, but I've heard this before. Like you go out to eat, you spend $150, and let's say you spend $700 a month on going out to eat or something like that.
That's a good month.
Yeah. There's people out there that do. Yeah. And so you're not getting any money back from the restaurant. You've paid way more than you would pay to just eat at home. But you don't view it that way. Same thing with rent. You're exchanging your money for rent for a home to live in. Same thing with a restaurant. You're giving your money to get food. You know what I mean? So it's the same thing. And like, I know there's different amounts there, but for some people, they spend a lot of money on food. So it's a different amount there, but it's just like your mindset around it. Like stop thinking you're throwing money away. Like you're paying for a place to live, and that's not bad at all. Just change your mindset around, why that you think that just because you're, putting money towards rent, it's such a bad thing. Like you're paying for a place to live. And I think we need to like change like our mindsets around that.
Yeah, I mean, when people say it's a waste, I'm like, then go live outside. Like, you're
Yeah.
not wasting any money. It's like, no, that sucks. Yeah, it's because what you're paying for actually brings a lot of value to your life. So, yeah, could spend a long time talking
Oh my
about
gosh.
mistakes around home ownership. And in the last episode, we did talk about that a lot, where people are just becoming house poor. But
Yep.
let's move on to the next myth. So this one says, I earn more than enough money. I don't need to budget. And look, I've said this before, but there seems to be this misconception that budgeting is really only for low income earners, or that you're broke, or whatever, right? But according to an article by fortune.com, nearly half of those earning $100,000 or more per year say they're living paycheck to paycheck. And what's even more shocking is that 1 in 3 Americans earning $200,000 or more per year are facing the same financial struggles. So, Lauren, why do you think so many Americans think that budgeting is this thing that you can just out earn?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people with a higher income think that because they pay their bills, they have fun, that they don't need to budget. You know, they're doing well. I think they consider budgeting something that like lower income people do, right?
Yeah.
I also think there's so many negative, like, thoughts around budgeting. Like it's restrictive, and if you have a budget, you're not allowed to have fun and things like that. And
Yeah.
so people with a higher income, they're like, I don't want to feel that way. I want to have fun. I want to, use my income and do the things I enjoy. Right. So if you're not struggling with your bills, you might think, I don't need a budget. But often, and I've seen it, working with people, the people that have the higher incomes are often the people that have like the messiest situations, and they've got plenty of money, but they have the messiest spending habits because they have no idea where their money's going. They have enough to pay their bills. They have enough to have fun, but they don't have any really real clear goals of what they want to do with their money. So
Yeah.
personally, I think that even if you don't track every single dollar, and I don't think you have to, I don't think that that's necessarily something you have to do, but you need to have some sort of like plan, So I don't know. I think that's where a lot of like higher income earners go wrong, is they just don't think they have to have one.
Yeah, and I mean, look, just because you're not going in the negative every month, just because you're not putting money on your credit cards doesn't mean that like you're winning with money, right? Like that's kind of like the baseline. Like I'm not spending more than I earn. Like that is kind of like the ground level, and that's where you can actually start to build a foundation and then start to build wealth, right? But yeah, you said it, like a lot of people have these negative connotations around just the word budgeting, like it means you're broke, or you're not good with your money, or you don't make enough money. And it's literally just, it's a thing that people do if they want to take control of their money. Like that's all it is. And I think a lot of things can fall between the cracks if you're not paying close attention to your money, because, like you said, like maybe you can afford it in the sense that like you have the money to spend, but you don't actually know where all of that money is going. Like you wake up after a few years of just kind of going through the motions and you have nothing to show for it. Even if you've made like a decent income, or if you own a home or whatever it is, like you maybe haven't built up your retirement or your other investment accounts. You don't have an emergency fund. Like you're literally just living month to month, and you're one bad day at work or one argument with your boss away from falling into I can't afford life anymore. Budgeting is often seen as restrictive, but honestly, like for me, it's really something that, like, as silly as it sounds, like sets me free. Like I know when I go to the store, I can spend this amount of money, or I know that at the end of the month, hey, all this leftover money, like I've already accounted for it. And maybe I didn't spend every single penny inside of each of these different categories. Like in my mind, that's almost like free money because I've already spent that money for the month. And now I can kind of just do whatever I want with it at the end of the month, right? Like it gives you the freedom and flexibility to say, here's how much money I have, and I'm allowed to spend all this money. It's not about what you can't spend. It's just about looking at how much you should be spending when you go out and do certain things,
Yeah, for sure. That's how I feel, at least. Like once I started budgeting, I was like, same sort of thing. Like, oh, this isn't like a restrictive thing. This is freedom to spend how I want, and I get to plan it because I'm writing the budget. You know what I mean? I also think I see a lot with, higher income people. I mentioned the messiness of their situation, but I also think that, they have a hard time when they do get on a budget to like, save or create, if they're not saving enough or they're not investing enough, they often have a hard time like cutting back on that, their, because they've been used to like, okay, I can cover all my bills. I can go have fun. I can do whatever I want because I make great money, but they have a hard time, like, pulling back a little bit because they're used to spending that. And now they have to like actually kind of plan things out and get their money to go where they want it to.
Yeah, I mean, going from like $700 a month on going out to $200 a month, which is $200 can still go pretty far. Like even today, like that's a huge lifestyle change that you have to make. Like that's from eating out like 3 days a week, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, to now maybe once a week you can go out and eat out and do something nice, right? Like it's a big lifestyle change. And if you've built up that light, like if you've allowed your lifestyle to inflate to meet where your income is at, like you don't leave any room for when you actually want to start making progress towards your financial goals. But you know, we have been talking a lot about budgeting, and we do have an episode where we break down budgeting methods, issues that people have with budgeting. But just like really quick, if you've never budgeted before, I think just like with all personal finance, like it's only as complicated as you make it, and a few easy steps you can do today. Just organize your budget with the most important expenses at the top, least important at the bottom. It should be prioritized in that order. And then assign every single dollar of your income a job for the month. So if you organize all of your expenses, you subtract that from your income, you have leftover money, just make a plan for what you want to do with it. Now that could be paying off debt or investing or saving or whatever it is, but that's as simple as budgeting needs to be. Now, of course, if you're going to budget, like you should be also tracking your expenses. That's how a budget becomes helpful throughout the month, because you can go to the store and say, hey, I've spent this amount of dollars out of my grocery budget, and now I know if I'm going to go to the store, I only have this much left to spend. But that's, I think, as easy as you can make it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump into the next one. The next myth says money can't buy happiness. So, you know, I think people often think that just by earning more, that all of their money concerns will be solved. Nick, do you think this is true or not?
I mean, I don't think money can buy happiness, but I also don't think if you're broke, like you're super happy either, right? Like you're kind of stuck in that survival mode of like you don't have the luxury of even worrying about like, hey, how do I feel today? It's like I literally have to go work 2 jobs to make enough money to make ends meet, right? Like and I feel like people who say money doesn't buy happiness, like I feel like that only really comes into effect like once you are earning a decent income, like once you're no longer worried about what your monthly expenses are. You kind of earn enough to cover the month. I think that's when the idea of money not buying happiness kind of comes into play. But if you're well below that, like let's say you make $30,000 a year, like if someone just dropped a raise into your lap and now you're making $130,000 a year, like if we were able to measure like your raw levels of happiness, like I guarantee you it would just shoot up, you know? And I think a lot of that's because it's going to alleviate a lot of the financial concerns, which is going to alleviate a lot of the mental burden of worrying about your money. And then now you can actually assess, okay, am I happy? Do I feel fulfilled? No, money doesn't buy happiness, but it does buy peace of mind, which I think is the next step to reach happiness, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, like you mentioned, once our basic needs are met, and there's some fun in there too, you know, anything above that is more like materialistic than anything else, you know, rather than actual like happiness, because then you just start to crave more and more. And then, you know how it works. You can get the new iPhone and you're satisfied for a week, and then you got to get something else, you know? So I think that there's like a threshold there, but there are like 2 studies that have looked into this. So back in 2010, there's one, and they found that if you made about $75,000, it increased your happiness. But after that, $75,000, it plateaued. So you really reach this level of happiness where I think is your basic needs are met. And then it just sort of plateaus from there. However, they updated this in 2021 and they found that
Nice.
This goes way past 75,000. However, I think inflation comes into this, as well as like the increased like consumer society we live in. So I think those are at play there as well.
Yeah, I mean, agreed, right? Like I think there's a threshold to where money doesn't really affect your happiness. Because if you take someone who's making $500,000 a year and you give them another 100,000, now they're making 600,000, like it's probably not going to affect their day to day too much. But again, if you give someone who's making 50,000, if you give them another 10,000, like that's going to go a long way for someone earning less money. But I do think what money does, like it doesn't buy happiness, but it does buy you a lot of choices and opportunities. And then through those different choices, you can seek the right opportunity that's going to actually give you purpose. And I think there's something to be said that, and it's not true in every single case, but I do think a lot of the times earning more money comes with finally finding what your purpose is. And I think a lot of people find purpose through work, which isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as it's fulfilling some of the things that you think are most important. But once you can actually find purpose in how you're earning money, then I think the more money, the more purpose you're driving into your life, the more you're able to do something that satisfies you. That's when I think there's a correlation between earning more and feeling happier.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think mindset comes into it as well. You'll hear
Mm,
people that have large net worths and they're just not satisfied with it. You know what I mean? So they're not happy. They want more. So it's like at some point you have to say, listen, all of my basic needs are met. I am not financially stressed. I can breathe at night, and you have to, realize then that like, okay, I'm content. But I think we constantly want more and more. And I think it all plays into like the money psychology of our entire existence. But at the end of the day, I think there's, a threshold of what's going to make you happy and what's really just kind of greed at the next point. Like how much
yeah.
more stuff can I have that I'm going to
Yeah.
try to make me happy. Right.
And I think that's why you see a lot of people who make like extreme amounts of money, like over $1 million a year. Like they go out and they tend to try to do things with that money more than just things that are self-serving, like buying nice cars. Like there's plenty of people who do that. But I do think there's a correlation between people who earn a high income, who go out and put that money back into the community, who then find that the more money they're making, the more happiness it actually brings, because they're giving that money a purpose. And it's not just sitting there in a bank account accumulating interest, which is nice to look at, but it doesn't really do anything for you. And I think if you can actually do something meaningful and that has purpose with the money that you have, that's when more money can correlate to more happiness. But anything else to add there, Lauren?
I don't think so.
Cool. Why don't we move on to the last one? And I love hearing this one. So this one says that investing in the stock market is too risky. And in fact, according to an article by Magnify Money, 55% of Americans think that investing in the stock market is as risky as gambling. So Lauren, why do you think there's this misconception that the stock market is similar to gambling, just as if you were to go in and like play blackjack or something?
Well, I think the media plays in to a big part of this. There's a lot of fear mongering. So which headline is going to make better news? The stock market crash, or the stock market's doing really well today. Like it's those ones that are more like radical. That grab people's attention, I think. So you're constantly seeing all like the doomsday articles about when the market falls, but you're rarely hearing like how well the market has actually done over the last 50 years. Right. I don't know. I think people also think investing is super complicated, and it can look very complicated when you're looking at like the New York Stock Exchange and there's all these different numbers and crazy things going everywhere. You're like, I don't know what any of that is. I'm just going to stay away from it. Right. I'm a lazy investor. Like I will tell you right now, I don't do single stocks. Like I do funds that cover like the entire market, and keep it like easy for myself. But I think a lot of people, again, they just see doomsday stuff about it. So they're just going to stay out. And then there's also the people that are like, this is way too complicated and I'm not smart enough to figure this out. So I think there's like two types of people out there and why people think that the stock market is too risky.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that fear, just like you said, comes from not understanding it. And like, look, I think like a lot of things in personal finance, like they're overcomplicated. They're overcomplicated and it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. But like, I feel like when someone says investing and if you don't really know what that is, like it just sounds like there's like an actual like barrier to entry. Like I don't have the knowledge to even understand what you're talking about. I think for a lot of people, they overinflate the idea of what investing is. And like, even what I talked about in one of the last episodes where like, I thought investing had to be like this big grand thing, or like you said, you're picking out the next like hot tech stock or whatever. And it's funny that you mentioned headlines because you're right. You don't hear all the times that the market is doing well, but you also don't hear the times when an economist said, hey, the market's going to take a downturn. Like that makes a big headline. And then you don't hear when all the times that they were wrong and where they were just trying to make a headline to get their name out there. And then the market actually did it, beat expectations. Right. But for those who are confused when it comes to investing, like it's really as simple as you're putting your money into a company and becoming a partial owner of that company. And that's why when companies have a responsibility to their shareholders, it's all the people who have invested in that company. And when the company does well, you do well. And that either comes in the form of the value of your investment increasing in price. And then with some companies, they'll give you a dividend, which says, hey, like we did really well this quarter. We're going to kick back a little bit to our investors. And it's really not much more complicated than that. Now, in terms of like what you can invest in, I really like what you said, Lauren. keeping it simple, being lazy about it, like picking out single stocks. There are literally people who will spend their entire career picking out stocks, and they probably won't beat something like the S&P 500, which just measures the top 500 companies in the US at this time, right? And the nice thing about picking something like an ETF or an index fund is that it's an automated list that automatically cycles through what are all the best companies in this specific sector. So the S&P 500, I really love that it continuously will pick out the best roughly 500 companies. And when a company does bad, it just kicks it out and replaces it with another company. And so by investing in just that one thing, you're exposing yourself to some of the best companies in the world, but certainly in the US. And it doesn't need to be that complicated. Just like with all the personal finances, you can make it as simple as you want to.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that like the average rate of return on the stock market's like 10% over years and years, right? Now that's an average. So some years we're going to be up, some years we're going to be down. And I think when it's down, you see people panic. So then that's whenever they're like, oh, my 401k, it's down, and they sell and they just cash out and take the money. So you don't lose anything until you actually pull out of the market. So until you sell your stocks, like you don't lose anything. You just have to ride the waves. Like I think that's so important is like, you have to understand that there's going to be ups and downs, but that's also how you're getting that 10% return, right? So I think that's super important for people to realize. And I get it. There's a lot of fear around it and people think they're losing money, but you really don't lose anything until you sell.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the 10% average rate of return across the stock market. There was actually a study done about returns for the S&P 500, which a lot of people will use the S&P 500 as like a gauge for the overall market. But there was a study done that looked at different amounts of time that you were invested in the market and what was the probability of earning a positive return. So it took all the years where you could earn a positive and a negative and then broke it up into different time periods. So they did 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 and 20 year periods. And so for every 1 year period in the stock market, and I think this goes back like over 100 years, but certainly to the inception of the S&P 500, if you invested your money in any given year in the past, there was a 70% chance of earning a positive return the next following year. But if you were to do that for any 3-year period in the past, now it jumps up to 83% chance that you'd earn a positive return. And if you go to 5 years, it gets to almost 90%. Now, if you invested for any 20-year period in all of history, there was 0% chance that you would earn a negative return. So essentially like 100% chance that you were going to earn a return in your money. And I think all of that is to say that the longer you are invested in the stock market, the greater chance that you have of earning a positive return. Now, a lot of people like to say that past performance doesn't indicate future performance, and that's obviously true. But I think if you can zoom out, if you like pull up S&P 500 on your phone right now and you look at the chart, if you are very zoomed in, you're going to see a lot of ups and downs. It's going to look like you're gambling because any day it could be up, any day it could be down. Someone says this one thing and that stock goes down, or who was picked for president and now the stock goes up or down or whatever it is, right? I think if you zoom out, you'll start to see that there's always this trend that the market is going to go up and to the right, meaning that the more zoomed out you are or the greater time period that you have that you're investing in, the better the chances that you're going to earn a positive return. And it's probably going to be greater than whatever you would earn in even something like a high yield savings account if you have enough time exposed to the market.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I actually watch one of my accounts. I have an old 401k that I rolled over to like a rollover IRA, and I haven't added anything to it. Obviously, it's just sitting there. And I look at like the graph of it when I added it like 2 years ago, and it's like a steady up to the right. And it's crazy because I haven't added one thing and it's continuing to grow.
Nice.
So I think that just shows you that your money in the stock market is doing good things. So if the market crashes and like we do not recover from it and everything goes to zero, like we have way bigger problems than our 401k. So I just want to throw that out there. Like we should be more concerned about a lot of other things, not just our money, because I don't think there'd be like a society after that, honestly.
Yeah, it's such an irrational fear because I'm like, if that happens, like we're trading bullets in water, and like where your 401k at is not even like a thought into existence. You know, it's like you said, much bigger problems to worry about if the market were to go to zero. Like we're probably in World War III or whatever it is, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so before we end today's episode, we wanted to do something a little different given that it's the holidays. So Lauren, what is something that you're looking forward to this holiday season?
Yeah, so this Christmas is the first time in probably 8 years that we're actually staying home. So my husband and I typically either go to his family or we go to my family. And this year, since we just moved to Chicago this year, we decided that we're going to just chill here and enjoy ourselves for Christmas. Nice. So we're excited. We're actually going to buy each other a gift, we decided, which typically we don't do, but we're going to do that. We're going to decorate the house all nice. So I'm super excited to like wake up and like be in my own house and enjoy my own Christmas tree. We also are going to go to the Home Alone house. It's in one of the Chicago suburbs. So we're going to go see it. And I'm super excited to like take my picture out front of it. So that's what I'm excited for. What about you, Nick?
I actually just watched Home Alone last night. So that's funny. That's really exciting. But okay, so for me and my wife, like I think the thing that we're both most excited about is next year we're looking at moving out of state. And so this is probably going to be the last like holiday that we're going to live physically close to both of our families. And so I don't know, I think it just adds a different level of perspective to it and like a different level of appreciation. Like we don't just have next year, like, yeah, we're probably going to fly out for the holidays, but that's going to be a whole nother ordeal. So this year, really looking forward to the way that the dates worked out for both our sides of the family is we're actually able to go to one side of the family and then the other side of the family is having it on a different day, which ended up working out great for us. So we're going to be able to see both sides of the family for all of the holiday season. So I think that's something we're really excited about.
Yeah, I love that. So you guys are actually switching what we did. You're going to be the ones traveling now probably for the holidays moving forward once you move.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be fun, although traveling during the holidays is always something I try to avoid. And so now it's we're not going to be able to avoid it. So we'll see if maybe we can take off like a few weeks around the holidays. That way we can travel early and then leave later, once it's all done.
Yeah, for sure. Probably your best bet.
Yeah, awesome. So that wraps up today's episode of Just Another Money Podcast. Now, one simple ask, if you laughed today, if you enjoyed it, please just share it with a friend. That's going to be the best way you can help us grow.
Yeah, and if you want to have your money questions answered on the show, you can visit our website, justanothermoneypodcast.com, and click the Submit a Question button. And don't forget to join us for our next episode of Just Another Money Podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations provided on this podcast are for entertainment purposes only and do not constitute professional financial advice. Any financial decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are your responsibility. We strongly recommend consulting with a licensed financial advisor or other qualified professional before making any significant financial decisions. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that we are not liable for any financial outcomes.